Hey everyone, this is S.M. Pratt, and it's time for the November 2024 Patreon exclusive Q&A video round 1. So first, the 2 Q&As we do each month. We have a full 3 pages today to go through. If you want to ask anything for the last Q&A video of the month, just type those questions in the MR comments. I'll print them out, give you probably a longer answer than you needed. So feel free to ask anything, and consignment should go live either this week or on the 21st. So whenever this goes up, you might have a small window. You might be able to escape the Death Star before the doors close to consign something. So the latest will probably be the 21st, which I think will wrap over right in the beginning of December, but just letting anyone know who's interested. All right, we're gonna get started here with a scented bit of Travis says, "Hey Scott, when it comes to cards you consign, it must have been a huge relief for you to eventually have your consignor send it directly to PSA instead of having to flow through you." Yeah, that definitely was a weight off my shoulders. I wonder, do you miss being able to see the wide variety of cards that would come in? I'm sure avoiding the hassle of processing all those cards far outweighs the joy of actually seeing or holding them, but I can't help but think you missed part of it. Follow-up question that's completely unrelated. I've been playing a lot of Sonic recently. Remember, you really liked the Genesis games and Mania. I wouldn't make you pick the number one, but could you rattle off some of your favorite levels? Dude, Sonic started out so strong until about Sonic Adventure, and then it got bumpy for a long time. You had like maybe Sonic Heroes in there, and then you got to like Sonic Mania. I think Generations was decent, but Sonic Mania is like what you expected from that golden era of Sonic. But yeah, levels. Sonic 2 is the first ever game I owned on a console, so like Chemical Plant Zone because of the music. The last level is just wild. I remember No Rings against that massive Robotnik who's like right out of the gate in Sonic Mania. So yeah, honestly, a lot of those levels are iconic. I don't know if it's just time, they matured well. The music throughout. I remember the whole lore of like Michael Jackson, like the old internet days. There was like 2 videos up about how Michael Jackson might have been involved with Sonic 3, so that adds a layer. But it is tough to beat 3 and Knuckles. Like that's just like a super game because literally fusion dance together. So anyway, that's what I got for Sonic. And then for your question about PMGC, yeah, it's definitely easier from a practical sense, but I do miss seeing some of those cards, and I actually enjoyed going through them on camera and just talking about them and seeing them. Now, the stress from that is that 5 minutes in, I might have forgotten something important, and because I don't know how to edit, I'm like, well, gotta start all the way back over. So that part was fun of like seeing it and just remembering some things, and that's really what I would do. Just like with these questions, I would just look at these cards, whatever came to me, I would say it and then move on to the next one, but sometimes I'd forget like something important. I'm like, all right, we got to start all over. So that part was a little stressful, but yeah, practically it's much easier. We've definitely freed up a lot more time for me, which I needed. So yeah, it was a weird thing of like enjoying most of it, a little bit of work, but because I'm too much of a perfectionist, I probably created too much work for myself. All right, Paul says, hashtag gotta ask them all. Hello everyone, SM Pratt. Wow, second, can't believe it. It's always a time of day. It depends when I drop the video who gets on the podium. Would you be able to share what market trends you have noticed as of late? Thanks for all you do. Honestly, there's not many major like things that stick out. Starting broadly, like the big things are, vintage, I think is wholesale underrated for a lot of reasons, which maybe I'll delve into later with some of their questions that people ask, because I know a lot of talk today is with modern, and I think there's actually barriers to entry today to figure out, what I'm talking about, going through people's cards they used to send me. That stuff to me is second nature because I've been doing it so long, but I feel like there's so much to keep you like in the modern arena, that it's hard to really get to those vintage gems, those hidden gems. So I feel like that's probably going to be the way it is for the foreseeable future. I feel bad because I don't do content anymore, but I'm just one little tiny pebble, grain of sand out there now in the world of content creators. And I feel like if one of those bigger channels really talked about vintage and just what they have to offer, things like Masaki's and stuff like that, I feel like it'd get the respect it deserves. But other than that, other than these broad sentiments, it's really tough to say like, oh, this is doing this. I mean, modern is acting irrational in the sense of how much is printed, but rational in the sense of how popular it is. And we've talked about that ad nauseum. There's certain cards I look at that I feel like are underrated. Like maybe if you want to talk about Japanese vintage holo, some of those promos, yeah, I think they're underrated in value. Does that mean they're ever going to go up again? No one can know. No one can know for sure. But I do feel like if you're looking at the market today as a collector, it's one of the best times to jump in. I was always cautious to say that in the past because back in the day, the market was not as established as it is now. You were looking at like a 240p, where today it's like 1080, 4K. The market is so stable. And on top of that, you have all this data to look at and digest. So yeah, now's a great time to enter. I mean, that's the big trend, I would say. And I was not as confident as saying that if we go back, especially even prior to 2020. I wouldn't be like, yeah, it's a good time to enter. Maybe 2017. But for a while there, it's like, yeah, these prices are bonkers. You're paying through the nose to get stuff, where today that just isn't the case. Outside of high end, and maybe that's the thing to end with there, is that I feel like high end's in its own arena where it's not really concerned with whatever's going on in the Safari Zone, which is how a lot of collectible markets are too. Whatever original painting's going on over here is not concerned with whatever Jaclay is happening over there. So yeah, I think high end is doing its own thing. I keep my eye on that a little bit more than every little microscopic modern trend. But yeah, that's really it. Even with that said, with high end, I don't think it's like a quick flip opportunity. I think you should have to buy this stuff and look long term. But I think there's better value provenance, if that's the way to say it. Like, you have more establishment. That's the word I'm looking for, with most of those high end items. So anyway, that, because it's really, really hard. It's a great example of, like, you don't need this insane. You don't need it to be the Chad. You don't need it to be the guy with the pop collar, and the Dep 8 gel in his hair. Like, it can just do its own thing, because you only need like 5 people to go for it with serious money. So anyway, there you go. That's off the top of my head of market trends right now. All right, Gengar MD says, hey Scott, thanks for the awesome content. I get a lot out of it. Appreciate it, Gengar. You look like a newer commenter too. Lately, with prices being so low since the 2020 boom, I've been expanding my collection with vintage PSA slabs. There you go, Paul. Just echoing exactly what I was talking about. I try to go for a mix of stuff I like, also stuff that's rare / good investment. I thought it could be fun for you to give a quick S. Pratt take on these. Maybe just a quick thumbs up or thumbs down. That makes it a little bit easier. I'll be like the Emperor and Gladiator deciding fate. All right, totally up for hearing your insight if you have any too. Maybe I get a solid deal or overpaid like a dummy. Here's what I grabbed. Shining Triantar, Japanese, PS10, 5,520. Yeah, Pop 63. I think that's solid. I think I sold one for around that range. I can't remember. I wish I could remember all the sales I do now. I think it was a little bit above that. I can't remember. It's somewhere in that ballpark. Recently, I sold one of those. PSA 10 Suicune Gold Star Japanese for 3,120. Little bit less on the thumbs down there, and I'll give you all the weeds. I'll give you the full detail here. Shining Celebi, that's how I pronounce it, like celery. Japanese Neo 4 PSA 10, it's a very similar price, 3,150. Then we have a Shiny Steelix Japanese PS 10, 2,715. And then Blaziken, I forgot to do thumbs here. I think these are all solid cards, so it's hard to criticize. And PSA 10 Blaziken EX Ruby Sapphire 592, that also feels fine. Like, none of this screams to me as like a thumbs down. Now, to give you detail on some of these, why I was a little bit like this with the Suicune is because they did suffer from that extra copy flood that happened. And this is actually a great example of like how all these trends back in the day that seem so significant are probably little invisible dots now on a plot, or invisible plots on a chart. So back in the day, a bunch of English Gold Star dogs hit the market. Let's say like about a few thousand of them. Now, the Japanese didn't see that, but maybe you could see a like cross connotation there, but ultimately I don't really think it has much effect. The only reason I have a pause is because they just don't sell as much as the English do. The English sell a lot more because of that added supply, so there's probably less data to get as strong of a feel. But again, this is weeds. That's why I preface it by like, we'll get into the weeds. None of this ultimately just be irrelevant. Shining Celebi makes sense. It's a little more than Steelix. It's funny because I remember back then, like, all those shining Pokemon are a snapshot of the time. You have like Noctowl, who was Ash's first shining, Charizard's Charizard. Celebi's like the new Mew Pokemon. Raichu is Pikachu evolved, and Steelix, they were really pushing Steel Pokemon back then. Like, that was the thing. Like, even Magneton got his shine. So anyway, he's definitely one of the lower of them. I think I've done almost all the shinings this year at some point for Neos, and these prices seem very reasonable. Really nothing to go like this to. That's all I can say. The Blaziken, the only thing I could throw out there, again, this is getting into the weeds. When I was at Worlds, I remember the EX cards strap-in were being sold for $1 each because everybody was focused on the Gold Stars. I remember thinking, it's probably a good opportunity. Back then, money was much more tight than it is today. I already spent so much. I already bought like 30 of the Pikachu 4X that year. So I spent a ton of money already. But yeah, I remember seeing them at that rate. But you got to keep in mind the context of that. today, like even the pop at 44, I think says it all. Like even these older cards have higher pops than that. EXA is so scarce. So yeah, the gold stars are kind of if you look at the pull pool of how many gold stars are there in a set, I know Ruby isn't one of those, but you have EXs that are in also gold star sets. If you actually look at the pull pool, I'm really curious to see what your total quantity is, if that makes sense. Because if you only have like 2 gold stars and 1 in every other box, but then you have like 10 EX cards, I'm just spitballing, and you know that ratio is like 2 per box, like what's that average, you know, total? Are they similar in quantity? So anyway, yeah, there's your over the top, ridiculously long-winded answer on your purchases. None of them to me really seem like a thumbs down. All very reasonable purchases, especially considering the market right now. All I can add to you, one, if you've stuck through all that rambling, the most valuable thing is none of these cards have ever been easy acquire items. The pop report is not just like a new thing. I think that's one thing I really want to emphasize is that while there's new collectors who are new to the game, these cards have been tough to grade from the jump. Shining Japanese especially is one of the... I have Shining Japanese cards that are flawless, but they treat even the little embossed shining thing as an indent. I'm just like, what do you want me to do? Like, this is just what the card was from a pack. Like, I remember opening this stuff. And it's just like, always been tough to grade. Always been a pain to grade. You know, gold stars have never been a cakewalk. Maybe you could say, like, first few years or whenever people started doing the arbitrage from Japan to grade, but those are long gone. Like, even these stories I'm telling you, it's like BC era. You know, it's like before Pokemon Go. You know, it's way, way in the past. So, anyway, there you go. These have always been chase cards from day one. Daniel says, hey, Scott, been a while. Glad to see you doing well. I want to get your opinion on strategy. I have a WotC box, or on an exit strategy. I have seen WotC boxes, or 7, I need to slow down. I have 7 WotC boxes with approximately 100,000 value, and at some point in the future, it could still be 5 to 10 years from now, I'd be looking to sell. 2 questions. Selling, would you say is preferred method of getting them sold? Letting them sit on the market and be patient at price point, or have a simpler transaction with one of the bigger players in the game? Payment, I have limited experience selling high-end items. What would be the best way to receive payment? Bank, wire, meeting in person, or PayPal? Would that do the trick? Any opinion on your experience would be helpful. So unfortunately right now, see, if you asked me this a few months ago, I'd have been like, yeah, you can process it with Fanatics, PFCC, it'd be a breeze. You know, even if they do the open thing, it still is going to get a solid return, if not market value. And the key focus there, it takes care of your second question. You wouldn't have to worry at all about payment. It's done. They handle that for you. So that's the opportunity cost of going that route. And you can still go to other options today. The only thing I would say, and I don't say this, enjoy saying this, it's just a statement of fact, but like they don't always necessarily get market value. Now, boxes are very popular and they can still do better. But, you know, I've seen some of these places, like I remember Heritage dropped a CP6 box almost half of what it was going for at the time. And I was like, this is just too much. It's one thing, like what I was mentioning with Fanatics, like even if you're knocking 10 or 20% off the price and you're doing no work, no risk, you know, there's a value there that's being added. But when it's getting that much of a difference, that's your opportunity cost you're up against. Now, if you're talking 5 to 10 years from now, we could be in a whole other world. Like Tesla robots might be processing all this stuff by then. So who knows what's going to happen that far down the road. But as it stands, those are your real main outlets. What I've done personally is anything in that 10K range and above is usually a bank wire. You know, even some of the Patreon members who bought Mario Pikachu boxes from me or whatever item it is, that's usually what I do. It's just very straightforward. It's, of course, easier because people know who I am. You know, there's at least some accountability there. But yeah, for you, it might make more sense to plug in. I wish I still could process this stuff. You know, I was doing it like clockwork for a long time with PFC. So maybe by the time you're looking to sell, that door might open again. Who knows? So yeah, maybe at that point there might be another option. But that's the overview right now, is going through an option, you know, third party. You don't have to worry about the payment part. If you do it yourself, you're probably going to sit a bit on stuff. You know, I get offers. Just had one yesterday from a guy who's trying to move a Neo Destiny box. You know, I get those offers every once in a while, and you could try to shoot your shot that way. It's just tough because I think the auction forces a move. We're going that way. You can definitely get the optimal value. It just takes longer. Like I've had stuff on eBay before Logan Paul was in the game, you know? So you can have stuff sitting there for years. You got to consider that. Even boxes, you know, I bumped up my prices a bit and that really changes things. The second that price goes a little higher, it really slows things down. So there it is. That's everything I think that, you know, that comes to mind. And ultimately you already won if you have these boxes, especially at a lower price than they are today. It really is just weighing out, do I want to get that nth degree of market value and be super patient? Do I want to auction it? And then if I do auction it, do you want to go through a third party? I don't even know how it works anymore on eBay for something like that. I definitely don't do that myself at this point on eBay. In fact, like there's an uncomfortableness when I get above 10K on eBay. It's not as comfortable as it used to be. So there you go. Again, this is just me, my experience. There's people out there who are like, yeah, SM Pratt's just a coward. Like, I sell 50K or whatever on eBay. So there's people out there who they devour risk like it's oxygen. And at 10K for me, I'm like, I don't know. I usually shy away from it. Or at least if you do a buy now option, you can vet a little bit more. But I feel like I'm rambling at this point. So there you go. Hopefully that answers it. I think third party is probably going to be your easiest risk option, low risk option. Than the other way, you absorb more risk, but you potentially make more money. All right, next up we have Cousin Vinny, who says, "Hey Scott, thanks again for sharing your brain with us. So if modern today is more of a hit mechanism, which makes sense, do you think there would be do you think that the biggest hit long-term the value of desirable full art cards, or is it going to sustain value on, I see what you're saying, on all of them or some, as more modern today is open in years to come? Or is a third impact mode? I can't think of everything. Peace, long life, Steelix backwards." Yeah, I don't really know, like, if I think that there'll be the biggest hit to long-term value of desirable full arts. The biggest issue I have with modern today, it's almost like too much of a good thing. And I've been saying this for a while in videos. I remember saying that a long time ago in a public video, because that was my initial whiff of this trend, or whatever you want to say. And it's tough because today it's more pungent. There's more cards today to collect. And I've been saying this since I think it was Koala or Gengar Brigade. I'm trying to give the right shout out to whoever it was who compiled all the alt arts. Because I remember saying in Patreon, I'm like, man, I just wish the alt arts had a little gold star thing there and make it so much easier to collect. And now it's I don't even know what to do. There's just so many of them, and I would love to have them all in binder, but it's almost overwhelming to start doing it, to start collecting. I feel like I see a new secret art rare every week. Seriously. And it might be a new one in a set or one that I haven't seen before because it flew under the radar. So with all that said, you really got to do this you got to be terminally online to really see all these cards and have a long-term impression and vocabulary with them, where with vintage, maybe it's because I've been in it so long and things move slower and you could really feel it more. All these cards are just locked in. That golden era stuff for me is just locked in. And maybe I'm wrong about modern. Maybe modern that's happening with some people, but I feel how it's presented now and how it's experienced, I don't know if that's happening as much. I don't know if it's oh yeah, that's this card, or the big ones they have staying power, but there's some beautiful secret art rares I see of Pokemon I couldn't care less about, and they're $5, and I don't think they'll ever stop being $5. I think that's just what they're always going to be. So yeah, I don't know what it's going to look like. Because even if you look at Blaziken, back in the day, I just talked about how they were $1 or $2, outside of maybe a Charizard or Blastoise or something. A lot of those EX cards were just $2 a piece. So I don't know if we'll see that type of trajectory where it's today they're $5 and years from now they're gonna be 500. I just don't know how that, with the sheer quantity, you basically have to sustain this popularity and then add to it because you don't have the condition factor as much as you used to. I think EX is actually a great example because they were the new sparkly chase card, but they were more scarce and not as easy to grade. Even if you want to get into the weeds and say ooh, this one's better than this one. No, today they are printed wholesale better than that era. Wholesale. It's wild how clean these cards are. It reminds me when the 90s junk wax era in sports, the cards then just felt like Kevlar. It's what do you, how do you damage these things? It's crazy. It's you're cutting your fingers opening them. They're so crisp. So yeah, anyway, they feel like a Tiger Woods rookie and onwards. I remember doing the Tiger Woods box. I'm like, man, these cards are so sharp. They're just so crispy. So anyway, that's how it feels today. Those are thoughts come to mind. And again, I could be dead wrong. This popularity could just keep rolling like it has been for the past year or so. As long as these systems or pipelines, or you want to say, are happening and sustaining, this is just what it is. It's part. I see guys who buy boxes from me who are streamers on Whatnot and do openings and stuff, and they're posting their lives and showing they're going to a concert over here. It's part of people's lifestyle now, in a way that it never was before. So yeah, that's what I got. I think that some of them will have plenty staying power, but I don't know if like some of these very obscure and not even like some of these are just decent Pokemon, but there's just so many secret art rares now. There's just so many. I don't know how it's going to echo that trend and how long it would take. Bob the Builder says, oh wait, hold on. We got Swiss here saying, let's go, Scott. He's usually on the podium. I swear it's the time whenever it gets dropped. And then we have Bob the Builder who says, CGC is lit, easy money printer. I just secured myself a negotiated discount with CGC below the authorized deal rate. Oh, good for you. Time to undercut. How many slabs a month does the second largest CGC submitter grade? I actually don't know. But they do a range of values. So they might, that guy is throwing around some serious money. PSA loves keeping high grading prices. Oh God. Trump is lit, but tariffs are not. Wait, is Canada most likely safe from tariffs? Is a 10 to 20% tariff over the international sellers who rely on U.S. buyers on eBay? Also, pop one PSA junk slab. Too many questions here, Bob. Building too much. As for the tariff thing, if that even happens, I don't know what it'll affect in collectibles. That's a wait and see. Like to try to give you some type of serious answer here. But yeah, who knows? That could all just be blustering. Who knows if any of that's going to happen. I definitely have enjoyed the past almost 2 decades of just being able to import. I just had someone who wanted to consign something and they're shipping from the UK and they're like, hey, you know, how do you like declare stuff when it comes to you? I'm like, I don't know. Like, just put whatever you want. Like, I honestly don't know because I never had to deal with it. Like, I remember they were like, how many illustrators that came directly to me, how many packages I've gotten from Japan with all those zeros from the yen on there. And it's, you know, never had to worry about any of that stuff. So I in a way, if it means I have to pay more, of course, I don't think any of us want that. But yeah, we'll see if it happens. But as for the CGC thing, the second, whatever, biggest grader with them, keep in mind, it's a huge drop off. You're probably honestly one of the top people going through them. That's not a shot at CGC. There's a smaller outfit, you know, where the volume at PSA is just like, I remember back in the day when like Ludkins and them were still rolling cards through and they were like the biggest Pokemon middleman. They were like in the top 30 or something or 20. And they said the gap from there to one is just astounding. And they're like they were by far the biggest submitter for Pokemon. So and this is before, you know, it all got crazy, but still like that's the tiers there. Next up we have E-Tango who says, hey Scott, regarding Pokemon TCG, as the user base and hobby grow and get more complex, one of the things that has changed a lot is finding information, diving deeper, how to get the right information, and how to not be overloaded by everything out there. Man, this is just right in the zone. This is what I meant earlier about why vintage might struggle a bit. How much of this is a challenge to new people coming into the hobby? How can we avoid the wrong information, hype drama, etc. into an echo chamber, especially when it comes to what you buy and collect? Also, as the hobby grows, do you see the divide between collectors, players, and investments growing wider? Or is it more or less the same that it was 5-10 years ago? That's a great question, D-Tango. Yeah, that's exactly what I meant earlier. I think it was a Paul's question or earlier one where we're trying to dissect why modern, or why perhaps vintage is underrated. And I think what you said is a component to why modern is so popular, because it's right there, it's easy to understand, it's all over the place, you don't have to dig that deep, you know, you can bring your booster box with you to a concert, you know, you can do whatever. It's very, very like in this same vein. Like that's why I hate to use the Safari Zone, you know, description, but that is in a way what you're doing. It's like you're just chilling in a place you're comfortable with, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that when you're trying to figure out a lot of these vintage cards, they're not being released today. You know, the constant 24-hour news cycle is a thing in Pokemon. And there's people who are talking about the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. When something existed 20 years ago, it will never be the next thing again. You know, unless you do like a Vintage Tuesday or whatever, and you really focus on certain things. It's tough. And I think on top of that, you have to have people like myself or a lot of these old heads who have all this experience that can really give you something to sink your teeth into. Because you can always Bulbapedia something, but like talking about, yeah, I remember at Worlds, these EX cards were this price, you know, or back in the day, was a trend that was going on, or people thought this, you know, that's something, the lore I think is interesting, at least some people. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right about how it is harder today to find value. It's harder to identify value. I think it's very easy to make a well-edited video. I think it's very easy to say the right things that will trend. You know, I think at this point, at least me, the stuff, any drama, whether it's Pokemon or elsewhere, I am just exhausted. And I wonder if that'll be something that catches on later on in a broader sense. I'm just exhausted. Anytime I see whatever, I'm just like, I do not care. Whatever's going on with P. Diddy, great. I don't care. Like, it's not my thing. Like, we're overexposed. That's a point I think that's relevant now, is we see too much. We are human beings. And, you know, until we become these omniscient Sauron, well, I guess Sauron's not omniscient. What is it? Omnipotent? What's the one where you can see everything? Like, we're not that. Like, we shouldn't be seeing all this stuff. Like, we're overexposed. And especially in something like Pokemon, where you're trying to figure out, you know, what do I want to do with these limited funds I have? You know, what I want to continue this journey. And in a lot of ways, like, Modern is a thing of beauty right now. I've been saying that forever. Like, these cards couldn't get any better. Like, they look, I don't know how you can make them any better. Like, glow in the dark. Like, what else can you do to make them look better? So, yeah, it's a luxury problem in that sense. But I think as for information, it's very easy to get caught in that, because everyone's talking about it, and for good reason, you know, mentioning how great they look. And it's fun to see these cards pulled or whatever. But yeah, it's tough to say, oh, here's the new thing that's 20 years old. And a lot of people, that's the cycle they go through. You know, I remember when Vivid Voltage, for example, which is still under the Modern umbrella, was the thing. I remember those boxes were going for like $250. Some even flirting with $300. Today they're like 120. And it's just like, that's the modern world. It's like it's not as rational, you know. And why that cycle happened is because maybe it compounded with, you know, all the stuff that's going on in 2020. Who knows, you know, what all the factors were. But the bottom line was, that was the set. Big old hyper rare Chunk Chew. Like, that was the card. Where now, you know, some people might still want it. It still has some, you know, some inertia, but yeah, this is how things are moving right now in Modern. It's almost like a stage. And, you know, that was last season's, or it's a fashion in a way. Outside of the fact that you can't really recycle Pokemon cards like you can elements of fashion. But anyway, it is like that in a sense. Like, it is a stage, and that's how Modern's being presented. It's hard to do that with Vintage. I think you need the combo of not only the Bulbapedia information, but someone who is there or has some, like, experience to really illuminate it. But yeah, I think that is it. It's harder from both ends. I think it's harder to create content about Vintage if you aren't in it. And it's much easier to do Modern, and it's just like, oh, here's the next new shiny thing. And I'm not trying to say that to downplay it. It is just inherently much easier to do that. And that's why it's all over the place. And that's also why it's harder, you know, to find the value at the end of the day. Next up, we have Monkey, who says, hey, Scott, these days I hear a lot about people saying Vintage over Modern is the best investment. What a segue, though, there, talking about similar topic. My question is, do you think that there's room for growth in Vintage? And are the naysayers right? My brain still can't accept that Moonbrown is overtaking some Vintage Grails, a common card being that expensive is nuts. For the price of PS10 Moonbrown, you could get a first edition Neo Discovery Umbreon and PSA 9. How can that be right? Maybe I'm just getting old. Also, do you think the Terrestrial Festival will break the run of Japanese sets dropping in price and release? It looks strong with all those evolutions. Yeah, I'm really optimistic about that set. It really is just about print run. As we've seen with Japanese 151. It goes up and then they push it back down, you know, with another wave. Great back-to-back questions here, because the idea that Vintage is dead is just absolutely juvenile. Like what you just said right there, let's just take your analogy. You talked about PS10 Umbreon, and then you said it's about the same as an Umbreon, and I agree. I see the underrated point, but we had to adjust the grade. And I remember when the waifu stuff was booming, at its absolute peak. At its absolute peak, what was the best card? What was the best one? Lily at 100K, whatever it was. Let's give her 150. I remember when I sold that trophy Kangaskhan, what did it go for? 144, so same price. And then another one sold for more than that. And that's not even the top Vintage card. Like, that was the tippy top of, and that was a bubble that everyone agrees on was a bubble. That's a bubble price. I sold that Kangaskhan at 150 before that. I sold another one before that for 150K years ago. So my point is that people who say that have probably little to no exposure to Vintage, you know, and they see things like what you said about Umbreon is a fair point. But ultimately, the Moonbrown is like the best of the best. So take that to the best of Vintage. Compare the best of the best. And if you want to stick with set cards, take the best of the best Modern set card compared to the best of the best Vintage set card. In every category, grade, everything. Vintage is always going to win. Always. Because you can't compete with that inertia. You know, Old Rare Mint or Better might not be the sexiest thing anymore. It might not be like the thing that'll give you the most amount of money anymore. But what it's going to do, what it's always the point of it all the time, was about value. That's all it's about. It's about just assessing value. It's not about making you the most bank. You know, investing, like when I made that first super cringe video, where you can still see the window in the background. And I was like, yeah, you know, this is Older Remembered Better is about assessing value. And I think earnings can come from that value. It's why you'll probably invest in the S&P 500 versus whatever crypto thing's happening. Now, Bitcoin exists and there's plenty of Bitcoin millionaires out there. Multiple things can be true. And that's the answer to the question, is that, yeah, vintage is definitely not as sexy today as it was before, but it still has all the record sales, and it definitely has the highest sale price on cards, without a doubt. And I would say if you took every single card, you know, like look at all the Charizard cards, you just can't get the sheer quantity that you can with something like a Moonbryon. You know, you just can't get that. And then even when you try to do a better comparison where it's more one-to-one, like with a prize card, modern versus a prize card vintage, because that way you're cutting out the quantity argument. Just look at all the waifu stuff. I remember when that was going on, I had people who wanted to consign like some of these waifus that, you know, they had like 10 of. And they're like, okay, I want to drip them into the market. I'm like, no, you want to flood this right now. You want to hydro pump all those into the market. Because if you have 10 of them, what do you think an actual business has? You know, what do you think all these other people have? That the people who just do this for a living, you know, this is residual stuff that's just lying around. So that's, I think, the tough thing for a lot of people who are investing heavily in modern to understand. Moonbryon is more the exception. You know, if you go through a lot of the vintage stuff, the thing you'll get to at a certain point is that go look at gold stars. What's the worst gold star? Well, if you look at the worst secret art rare, like I said earlier, it's probably going to stay $5 forever. There's no gold star that's ever going to stay $5. Ever. Like, that's not possible. Where there's plenty of these new secret art rares, they're probably going to say, let's just move it to 10 to make it feel better. There's plenty of them that'll sit there for a long, long time. So when you look at the whole picture, there's definitely things to be excited about in modern. There's definitely chases happening, and more power to it. Like, if that's what you want to do, if you want to chase popularity, that's your call. Like, you know, Charizard base set is not a rare card, but he's the most popular card. He's probably one of the most popular trading cards ever exists, you know, out of all trading cards. So that'd be my take on it, is that I remember when this was going on, and I was catching a lot of strays from people and like the vintage bro hate and all that stuff when waifus were going on. I remember saying it. I'm like, yeah, this is speculative. This is something that isn't going to last. It's also weird. It's not in line with classic Pokemon collecting. And I don't mean like you got to do exactly the way I do it. I mean people who get into Pokemon typically because they like their experience of Pokemon. And, you know, these trainers play a role, if you will. But what was going on there was not that. It was some other vibe entering, and now it's all gone. And even at the peak, it wasn't touching even like these, not even the top trophy cards. You know, not even like an Illustrator or 97 Pika or whatever you want to say. So yeah, that's what you really have to consider, is compare every variable equally, and, you know, the answer's there. But yeah, it's just what's going on right now, and if that's what people want to do, that's fine. You definitely are absorbing more risk in relation to just sheer quantity. You know, like that guy mentioned, who I hope they offload those cards as soon as possible. But when they came to me with their 8 waifus or whatever it was of the same card, it's like, yeah, you're one dude. Like, you're one guy. What do you think like Endel Games has in Japan? You know, what do you think? Let's not even go there. Let's just go to some random store in Japan. What do you think they have with those same waifus? You know, this is stuff that was put in boxes, sold nationwide, and now it's globally sold, as we've seen. Snorlax is asleep on that printer. So that's what you're up against. You're chasing popularity. You're not chasing fundamentals. You know, even if you want to weave in popularity as like the low-key, whatever, redhead stepchild fundamentals, that's fine. You know, you're really up against a lot of other stuff there. These cards are easy to grade. There's a ton of them out there. They look beautiful, and that's why they're popular. But the more of them that keep coming out over and over and over again, it's just harder to keep up with it all. You know, and what that's going to add more downward pressure to it's going to add a price ceiling that I think you didn't have in the past. There's a better point. I was rambling. I think it's going to add a price ceiling in a way that you don't have. Like, look at what this, the question was earlier, I think it was from Gengar MD, about their chase cards they bought. All those cards are much more scarce, also hard to grade, and always have been. You know, where you can't say that about these cards today. So if that popularity wanes at all, you know, what's the outcome going to be? It's a very curious situation, and I'm going against the current inertia of popularity. The popularity wave is strong today. I'm really trying not to hate on it or anything. I'm not trying to criticize. I'm trying to weigh the pros and cons of why people are saying, you know, vintage is dead. It's like, yeah, vintage is not screamed about in videos, but what modern card is going for more than Illustrator? Let's just start there. And then let's work our way down of all the other cards it's not topping, you know? So anyway, that's why I got it. I think the Trophy Kangaskhan's the best example, because I remember doing that during that waifu bubble, and it was just, yeah, that's like the second or third one I sold in that range over like 4 years or so. So that's what I got for that one. Go on forever about that topic because it's a constant thing and it never really used to exist. That's the final point, I guess, is no one really had this weird comparison. There's an odd vendetta against modern people when it feels like a bit of projection because I've always done both of these. You know, I did PokeCune when it was modern. I bought all this stuff from a distributor. I opened it. I sold my open PokeCune boxes and CP6 boxes, all that stuff. I was buying all this day one. EX cards. I remember buying those when they were new. I remember when Power Keepers was a new set. I've been buying modern forever. You know, I've been buying modern, whatever that phrase is. When it was, now it's vintage. I've been buying vintage when it was modern. That's it. That's what I've been doing. So there wasn't this weird disdain. I feel like there's a weird projection with vintage and whatever. That's fine. Like, yeah, that's why I got on it. It's an odd situation because there's so much tunnel vision on these chase cards because they are beautiful, but there's just not as there's no scarcity. There's no scarcity and they're easy to grade. All right, next up we have Michael who says, "Hey Scott, I tried to grade some older packs of PSA. Just wondering in your opinion, are PSA packs underrated? Because as a collector, I feel like there's some pack art that's quite good to be displayed." Yeah, I do think there's an underrated element there in that sense. I actually talked with Brent about this, which I'll expand more in the next MMR. Brent, founder of PABC, is like really big right now in authentication, especially for sealed stuff, because I do feel like it's underserved. I don't know how many people, I think the protection part is great, display is great. I don't know how many people, though, are pining for it heavily. I think it's something where it's just like, you can take it or leave it as it stands. You know, I've even seen guys do like Card Saver, Team Bag. I've seen a lot of displays, but I do agree. It's a very simple, official, you know, way of presenting it. I have graded packs in my collection. I have packs I still need to send out to PSA that I just want for myself encapsulated. So yeah, I think it's there. I'm just trying to contextualize it. I think it's a more niche thing. Even when I was talking to Brent, that was my exact caution, is that, yeah, this, I think you're doing the noble thing for collectors, but I do think it's a very niche market. It's not as big as card grading, and never will be. Card grading is like insane how much goes through there, where pack grading is probably 100th of that, and that might even still be too much. But I do agree. I think there's a need for it. It could be subtly underrated. Very small 9 font, as this is typed out, level of underrated, not like a 72 bold italicized. All right, next up we have Lucky Carpet says, "Hey Scott, it's widely accepted that alt art cards have phenomenal arts and scarcity, which has driven demand and push ours is high. Now for the controversial part. I believe the positives end there. While they're scarce relative to other set cards, they're not actually scarce in print run terms. Additionally, the sheer volume of alt arts across the years is huge, which has diluted the impact. Most importantly, good artwork tends to be superseded by a clear, obvious differentiator when it comes to drivers of demand. It's a lack of shining gold star crystal that detracts from alt art identity and will limit them in the future." Yeah, that's exactly what I said organically before. I'm like, it just needs more of a distinction. Even amazing rares to me have a little bit more of an identity there. For some reason, I believe the only survivors will be the ones with combined a popularity species with true memorable release, such as Moonbryon, Rayquaza, Gengar. Yeah, Latios. On the other hand, I could be completely wrong, and I'm missing the biggest opportunity in the market. What's your best strategy view on alt arts? These questions are just like, it's crazy how much they flow. Yeah, I think the issue I have is, am I even saying it right when I call secret art rares alt art? Like, I don't even think we can all agree on what to call things anymore. I remember that started with like rainbow rare, hyper rare. Because in Japanese there's hyper rare, and I stuck with that. And then it's like, well, English says rainbow rare, and it's like, fine, we'll just understand that's both. It's like you have to learn multiple languages to do this stuff. And today when I open like a Mew secret art rare, which I think is what it's called, from 151, I'm like, is this also an alt art? Like, where does it start and stop? You know, and this is why they need better, like, just even a little insignia. Gold stars are chef's kiss of a chase card. This new, fresh idea, bumping out of the border, shining as well. You got the little star there. Beautiful. Thing of beauty. EX cards, boom, on the card itself. A little bit more hollow, great. It's very easy to identify. Even Level X, we'll give the redhead stepchild a nod. Level X, kind of like EX too, but still, you know what it is. It's very easy to be like, oh, here's all Level X cards. It says on the card. So yeah, with alt arts, like the tag teams in there as well, and it's tough. It's like you have like these little sub identities, and it's just a lot. The terminology is tough to keep up with. Even when I'm like, oh, a secret rare in Japanese, what is that in English? You know, what's a gold card over here called in English and Japanese? It's like, we need like a table of contents on our wall when we collect or in our binders, because I think that's part of the issue. And to your point, I think that's what people are going to be up against in the future, is that the Moonbryons and all that would be more than fine. They're made men, but there's going to be so many lost in the fog. Even with full arts, you see it. There's certain full arts that don't do as well as others, but ultimately, you still know it's a full art. There's no, like, what, like when I want to do a current binder on all the chase cards, what do I term that as? Like, what do I call that? That's the tough thing. Because it's like, I do a lot of Japanese, so it's like alternate rare or AR and then SAR. It's like, do I just combine all that? Do I do that separately? It's a lot. There's a lot of cards happening today. Where back in the day, it was easier to focus on the chase. That's another thing. It's another thing that comes into it. So yeah, you're right. Print runs, this stuff is not rare. And one maybe valuable point here that I didn't say is that, let's just stay under the vintage umbrella so we can take a lesson about what we're dealing with now that's always been there. I remember making a video a long time ago, I don't know if it's still up, where I said rarity versus scarcity. And I remember telling people they were surprised that the Shadowless PS10 set didn't do as well as what they expected. And I was like, yeah, because it's not rare, it's scarce. These cards are not rare, they're scarce. I love Shadowless to death, couldn't love it anymore. It's not, even with its one print run or whatever, it's still not that rare in that sense, of comparing it to like a trophy or whatever people were doing at that time. So that's the takeaway, is that was happening with Shadowless, which had one print run apparently. This is with like sets that you could probably take all of the WotC era in one of these new sets being printed. It's outlandish how much this is being printed. Like it's unprecedented. So yeah, that's the thing that can't be overstated. Now, maybe a counterpoint, subtle counterpoint, is there's such a variety of cards. How does that all play out in total quantity? But even then, the sheer number of what's being printed today is wild. And if people who were talking about that, Shadowless set back in the day, struggling with rarity and scarcity back then, again, this is such a smaller, more contained set. And even then, it's like, yeah, there's going to be another copy of those cards. There's going to be a whole other set of these cards in every single grade. It's going to happen. So that is definitely a harsh distinction, and kind of tying in that thing about how to get to that value. It's hard to get that in a video. It's hard to say that easily. Even like back then when the market was more chill, it's really hard to be like, well, this is rare and this is scarce, because immediately you get the little ankle chopper piranha comments are just like, this is whatever, you're dumb, whatever. Like that's the climate we're in today. And these things influence people to make their decisions. It's not as pure as it once was. It's not as we're all on the same team as it once was. There's people in Pokemon who, I remember speaking to Kangaskhan, who apparently hate Kangaskhan. Like, it's like, why are you here? Like, what? It's crazy. So yeah, that all plays a role. That's why there's so much tunnel vision on this. I'm not discounting any of these moves. Like, these cards have definitely increased in price. But as I mentioned with Vivid Voltage, that was a modern set 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now, that is still not recovered from its $300 price tag or $250 price tag. And who knows how long it's going to take. I'll let you know, because I got cases of it in storage just collecting dust. So yeah, that's just the overall climate right now. And I think that the distinction is very important, and also the lack, like you had just, that was your chase that you went after. That was your big card. Even when you had Gold Stars and EX, it's like, that's still two things. Now it's like, again, we need a table of context. Like Secret Art Rares, whatever AR is, Art Rare, Flat EXs, Full Art EXs, Gold cards. Are they still doing, please God, no more Hyper Rares? I don't think they are anymore. It's just, even when they were, it's like there's too much in here. There's so much going on. But again, I'm just rambling at this point. But yeah, the print quantity is over 9,000. And scarcity is not the same as rarity. Scarcity is in a context. Rarity is a total view. James says, did you ever comment on the Game Freak leaks? P.S. Did you have to mention the thing about Typhlosion if you don't want to? I don't understand. When I saw that, I was like, is this like what furries want? Is this their like utopia of like Pokemon getting with humans? And then maybe leaving her as a single mom? I don't even remember the whole story with it. But after I saw that, I'm like, I'm good. I don't want that. I want to keep my like Southern Island joyful comfort view of Pokemon. Like, I don't need any of that. Keep those leaks. Like, we don't need to know that. Keep that where it belongs. But yeah, I saw some of that stuff. I thought the interesting thing was that Bunny starter would have been cool. Of course, I think Gen 3 stars have really grown on me. Those were the new ones when I got back into it. But yeah, that Bunny Fire one would have been cool. Definitely better than Score Bunny, I'll say that. But yeah, that's about all I saw with the leaks. After I saw Typhlosion one, I was like, all right, we've seen enough. It was that internet meme of closing the laptop. And part of me is like, I don't know how much I want to see. Like, I like beta information. You know, did you know gaming did a great thing on like Pokemon that could have come out or would have happened or influenced whatever. That's interesting to me. But like stuff like this, like I don't want to see. I don't want to hear about like Rule 34 on the internet where Pokemon and humans are like smashing. I don't want to see that. Like that's not what I'm about. So anyway, that was my experience with the leaks. All right, Chris says, with the rapid appreciation of Pokemon Center ETB stamp promos, particularly those fetching significant premiums in PSA 10, what factors do you believe will influence future market value of these cards? Specifically, do you anticipate the current high prices will be sustained as more new stamp promo cards are graded in entire circulation, or could we see a market correction due to the number of people speculating on sealed? Looking at the pop reports, they're relatively low for modern cards. Thanks, Chris. I think this is a great example of looking for something unique. It's why the grailification is so hot right now, is because people are trying to be a unique light in a absolute, like, seemingly never ending just void of collectors these days, or people, or whatever you want to say. You know, so they're trying to deliver an impression. I even see people who are buying some of these prototype stuff or some of these elite cards, and it's like, oh, that's cool, and I completely forget about them. You know, because there's just so many people today. There's so many people out there. So anyway, I feel like that's part of it with modern, is you're trying to find something a little more scarce. Ultimately, it's similar to our previous conversation. Even when you're saying lower pop, it's like, okay, what does that really mean? Is it like Art Academy low, or is it low in the context of, you know, compared to a set card? Yeah, it's something, but ultimately we've done this dance before. I remember 20th anniversary Pikachu was kind of similar to this. You had a cool stamped one, which I still have some of those. Now it's not on stage anymore. You know, it exited stage left about 5 years ago, or whatever that was. 7 years ago now. So anyway, that's in the same vein, I think, where a lot of these will land. Outside of your like Evolutions Charizards, you know, your really big popular ones. Outside of those, I don't know how much sustained power they'll have, because what they're going through now is probably more of a current trend of availability / unavailability. And down the road, it's going to be more of a testament of desirability, if that makes sense. Kind of like that Pikachu promo I mentioned. Initially, it was the current availability, unavailability thing we were all doing. And now it's like, okay, how desirable is it long term? Because this thing's been out of print for a while. So yeah, that's why I'm curious to see. And I think it's going to be somewhere in between those points of like a Modern Chase and that Pikachu promo. It's going to be probably flirting more with that. But because there's so much more today and so many people scalp or whatever, what's the new word we're doing now? I feel like we're not hearing much about scalping anymore. Maybe it'll evolve into some new villain. But yeah, more people are doing it, more people are aware, more quantity, but somewhere in that vein between those 2 points. No number Nolan says, hey Scott, wild cards are clearly your largest collection. If you had to pick one, would you collect magazines? We're doing it. Magazines, postcards, phone cards, and video games. I enjoy torturing you in these scenarios. At least you know it's torture. Yeah, it's probably... Magazines are the most bang for your buck. Like, the other day I opened one up. I'm like, oh, there's like Iggy's Wrecking Ball. Or like, you know, these advertisements for N64. You never know what you're going to stumble upon. So yeah, it's great bang for your buck. However, phone cards and postcards are so close to trading cards. They're kind of like Adam almost touching God's finger. It's like you're right there, just a little bit larger, but some of them have beautiful art, so it's like you just deal with the chubbiness or whatever of a postcard. That's really tough. I could safely say video games wouldn't be, while I love them and collect them, actually I'm watching a big one right now that's going in auction, but it's not going to be something that's going to be, I feel like trading cards and magazines, there's more of like a, you explore them more for their collectibleness or whatever, where like video games, it's more about playing them. You know, it's about having it, at least for me, like I can put those into the N64 or the new analog 3D whenever I get it. Yeah, that's more what it's about, more about that experience. So anyway, there you go. Wasn't too bad on the torture there. Lucky Carp says, hey Scott, swooping back in for another. I've been following the price movements in my sealed inventory on a quarterly basis. What stands out is that Japanese has definitely stalled. And in many instances in falling, we see Blue Sky Stream, Eevee Hero, Shining Treasures, and V-Star Universe. For a good few years, Japanese was a place to be. The sets I've mentioned above all are top tier, are all top tier and high demand. This makes me think that we're finally starting to see an impact of changing market dynamics on price, specifically the influx of Japanese sealed product removal, barriers to entry. Bingo. That was exactly what I was going to say. I've even heard anecdotally that Japanese markets are getting FOMO and buying English sets. Although I prefer Japanese, the overall demand for it is significantly lower than English, so this is deluge of supply is finally drowning prices. Good news if you want to open this stuff, but the investment opportunity seems to be vanishing, what's your overall view on Steel Japanese? Overrated, underrated? For what it's worth, I plan on continuing to buy Japanese regardless of the current market conditions. There could be an opportunity in the coming years where demand moves the hot products and supply evaporates accordingly. I also think the fact that boxes are half the size. Oh, I like the box half the size. Thanks, Max. Yeah, I think that everything you said is 100%. Like you said exactly what I was going to say while reading your question, that there's less barrier to entry. There used to be more, which also kept supply down. You know, when we're talking about price ceilings, that restriction or barrier kept supply lower than perhaps what it could have been, because it was more difficult to acquire. I remember back in the day, I'll give the shout out, I don't even know if it's relevant anymore, Miyami and Plaza Japan used to be the go-tos. You know, you can get stuff there at a great price. I don't even know, because I haven't checked those stores in ages, especially since I was buying from a distributor. If they are still available, it's either prices are higher and or supplies just gone instantaneously, because this stuff is just so, there's no barriers now. There was someone who did like a flash sale. I forget what set it was. It was like one of the main sets, definitely not one of the V-Stars or Blue Skies or any of that. And it was like $40 a piece. And they were selling from the US. I'm like, how are you making money? Like, I'll just be completely transparent with you. To get those to my door, if I was selling at $40, I would probably make nothing. After all the shipping I pay to get it delivered to the grandma house, I am not making anything. That's basically my cost basis. So I don't know how people are doing that. There's not this magical place where you can just get this stuff in mass. What I'm guessing, just me going on a branch and complete speculation, they could be like using another entity or have a footprint over there, which may or may not, something similar to I do as well, but to a level that you really have to be buying crazy volume, you know, to be able to successfully do that in the US. So my point is more to what you said about how these barriers just don't exist like they used to. It definitely just gets rid of, or sorry, earlier when I said supply ceiling, today it's the opposite, where you have more of downward pressure because there's so much, it's all open. Back in then, it was like this one door you had to find after like talking to this person. It's like the big Goron sword. You know, you had to go get the frog eyes, get them over here, get the buzzsaw, get that, then get the broken sword, then get the verification, whatever. You had to do all that just to buy, you know, from a distributor or buy from Japan, where now it's just like some guy on Instagram's dumping boxes at $40 a piece. And now that's not sustainable. I went back and looked at that seller. I don't even remember their name anymore. And they weren't selling anything. So this is, the world we're in today is so wild. It's just such a, it's like you get like a Cat 5 sale hurricane and then never again. You know, like that could have been a once in a lifetime opportunity to buy those boxes. So we're at a place now that's just, I don't know how to predict trends outside of, the one thing I'll say here is streamers are definitely dominating a lot of the sealed market. They're creating a lot of sale channels and experiences, and I think it's much easier to do that with English because their target demographic is primarily English. You know, so that's why I think English is just another reason why it's doing so well. Where Japanese modern, I still think is doing more than fine, but when you compare it to English, who has just accelerated heavily in a way that we've never experienced, it can't be overstated. English modern, if you go watch one of my older videos that, of course, are getting the little piranha ankle biter comments, modern back then was just so slow. So slow. Pre-order boxes stayed at $90 because they were just happy that you were pre-ordering. You know, $90. That's what I would always pay for a pre-order box. You could buy any set, $90. Any of them. I'm even talking like post-Evolutions era. That's just what it was for a long time. That's why when people were tripping about MSRP, it's like, yeah, you have to pay it now for the first time ever. Because for the previous 20 years, it was $90 to $100 a box. So we're at a different game now, where I'm looking at like the newest set that came out, and I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll pay $125 a box, because that's just what it's going for today. Because these streamers and all this stuff that's going on exists in a way and is creating a demand that just never existed. And it sustains it in a way where, you know, you had the pandemonium in the 90s. You didn't have these channels. You didn't have these sell channels like you do now. You had Ken Golden sweating it out on QVC, but that was it. That's what you had to do. Everybody can be their own QVC now. Everybody can do it. Anybody can be that now. So that compounds on itself. That's why this popularity is sustaining, you know, as we speak. But yeah, that's, I think, the reasons why. It's a little more palatable to do English stuff. I do agree. Like, I see Japanese 151 openings all the time. It's not like Japanese doesn't exist. I've seen V-Star. That's why the pop for those is wild. V-Star Universe in particular and 151 are like flirting with Base Unlimited, because they're definitely streamable. They're just great. They're just so much fun. I've never opened one of those and not had a good time. They're just great sets. So again, right now we're in the more availability, what's on stage, what's happening. And then down the road, we'll have to assess desirability. And I think those sets will have more desirability long term. And I'm doing the same thing. I may be wrong too. And I am buying a little bit more of English, I guess, than I used to, but I'm just letting this stuff chill. Like I said, Vivid Voltage, I got that still sitting on the shelves in English and Japanese. It's still just chilling there, Like Roaring Skies, a final point here. I remember Roaring Skies when it got reprinted. It got printed to about $89 a box, and I bought like 10 cases. I gave those boxes to the E4 staff for Christmas. Like that was one of their, I usually give the, especially the active staff, like a box and a little care package. And that was the box I gave away because that's what it was. It was like $80 at the time. I still have probably majority of those cases. How long ago was that? 2017? So that's how I operate. Very, very slow and steady. Even some of these boxes I have on eBay, Rolling Skies being one of them, they've gotten good numbers and they're like 10x what I paid. And, I've had a few sales and people are like, oh, would you take this? Would you do this? I had a guy come to me, wanted to buy all the Evolutions. I'm like, that's good. I'm going to take your offer and consider that a good, value metric of the market. And I'm just going to chill. So that's how I've always been, just giving you my whole perspective there. Because even with this stuff being less trendy or whatever, you got to keep in mind, Roaring Skies was $80 for a long time. And not, let's say 90 to 100 to be safe. It was that for years. And, look at what it's today. That's all the variables I can think of to address that one. All right, Colin says, hey, Scott, first month here on Patreon. I've been bringing the content. Glad you're here, Colin. Appreciate the purchase, by the way, on the Mario Pikachu boxes. Awesome community, asking super deep questions. Yeah, I feel like I just go on way too long, so apologies to all the new members who are like, all right, can you just answer the question and stop letting your brain just fire off? Super deep questions with super insightful responses. Since I'm newer, I am sure this has been brought up in older videos, but want to get your thoughts on the 2021 Creatures corporate deck. I think these are super cool and have the good fundamentals you generally reference in your videos, so I've been picking them up where I can. But aside from pure monetary value, I think they're super fun to collect and just having amazing collector value. I am currently sitting at 7 of them, but excited to complete the whole set. As a side, in case you're curious, I have the Mewtwo EX, CGC10, Rainbow Energy CG95, Tapu Lele BGS95, Uxie BGS95 versus Oak BGS95, and 2 Magma versus Aquafying Energy BGS95 and PSA 9, and a Switch PSA 9. Yeah, so the Creatures deck, I have touched on it before, and it's tough because, things change. I feel like they came out really hot and got to a point where the availability and demand really hit a sweet spot. And then the availability started to come in a little bit heavier. Now, keep in mind, we're talking if availability comes in heavier, that could be 3 decks. Great example of actual rarity versus scarcity. These are actually rare. Very safe thing to say. Let's just say there's 1,000 decks. It's like, how many of those are actually going to surface? This is that level on the mountain that is really tough. Like, you have to add so many qualifiers to set cards to even get to those numbers of like, oh, well, it's Black Label or Pristine or whatever, PSA 10 to, all these qualifiers to get there. So for me, that's a good starting point, is that I think it's just great owning any of these in any grade. And it's tough to talk about future valuation. Let me give some criticism, I guess, if I can even think of any, is that they aren't technically like classic trading cards. However, I like that to their benefit when I actually consigned a full set of them. And kind of tying in that question about enjoying them in person, because I did do a video on them, it was fun seeing the backs of some of them as much as the front. In fact, some of them, the backs were better. Like, I think one had a shot of the TMB tournament on there. I think the Sneasel or something had the Super Trainer Showdown. I can't remember. But these are like really big moments in time for people who collect Pokemon seriously. These are really impactful, images or whatever you want to say, like things that mean a lot to serious collectors. So it's cool to see that, because you can see that exact art on the actual card. If you want to go get a Sneasel, you can. But it's cool to have that, the front and back there. But yeah, other than that, I think the front runners are the prototype Chansey is the standout. She's the queen of the deck, if you will. And the one card, the Time Warp or whatever it's called, the other unique art in there. Charizards are next in line. Some of the ones you mentioned. The thing you got to keep in mind is this deck is meant to be a playable deck. Whatever madman thinks they can play with this deck, more power to you. I've seen people do first edition Shadowless box breaks, so who knows? Maybe this is the final level of whatever, of flexing and battling with actual cards. But that's the idea. That's why you have such a variety of energies and, Oak in there and like these strong trainer cards. Yuxi, oh my god, Yuxi was the bane of my existence on PokeGem because that's all everyone talked about because it was so playable, and that's why it's got a spot in the deck. So that was its intention. I'm just trying to hit all the angles here. That's what it was made for. I think most of us who are buying it seriously just love the collectability part of it, the rarity of it, and the history that's tied in. Seeing the front and back of those cards. A lot of them really are a snapshot. When I look through that deck, I can remember those eras. I remember the Yuxi era. That's when I got back into it, around when I got back into it. I remember all of that stuff, and it's very nostalgic going through and seeing, the cards and how they all evolve, and especially the early era as well. I remember when those cards were playable. Even Sneasel, I remember when it was banned. I remember seeing I've never seen this in person, the big banned Sneasel card. So yeah, these are very historical, impactful, valuable cards from a competitive era as well. So yeah, I think that's what I got on them. Outside of that, it's tough to speculate on what they'll do. I just can't say enough that the Chansey, to me, does so much. I think it's just such a cool card in every regard. The Chansey is just so cool. That's the one. There was a point, actually, when those cards were consigned to me, I was like, could we work some out for this Chansey maybe? And it was just, we went back and forth. I'm like, yeah, it's just easier to sell it all. But that was the one that I thought about buying myself. But anyway, yeah, other than that, that's what I have on them. I think they're good. I think it's a serious collector item, but it's definitely popular enough that I think people are always going to recognize them. And also, one final point is there's been enough of them in circulation for not only to get data on it, but to feel confident in buying it, where there's certain items that appear where it's like, like, for example, the trainer cards with the actual human in them, we didn't know about those for like 20 years. So that should be like magic, right? But there's been multiple, and we know that they're extra copies, obviously, because unless this person's doing like double team and they're like sword dancing and forming alternate selves, like those are clear extras. And what's interesting about it is that those have had a lot of volatility, where I think the creatures decks haven't been as volatile. In fact, I think some of them have come back up since like those handful of decks hit the market. But again, I'm in the weeds now, and that's what I've got on it, is that there's definitely price trends in recent history that have fluctuated, but ultimately they're very popular, I think impactful for the hobby, and it was just a fun thing to see. I don't know how often creatures are going to do something like that. It's a very rare bird. It's kind of like a Rocket 20th in a way. You don't get to see those type of releases very often. All right, we got Swiss, who says, hey, Scott, I've guided a lot of my purchase decisions by your 3 commandments, ultra rare, mints are better. Modern is killing it, but it's missing 2 of the 3 SM Prep pillars. What do you think? Who is the one-eyed king? Yeah, it's tough. It's kind of like a lot of things I've been saying previously. They definitely aren't older and or rarer, and Minter's there, but it's easier to get to Minter. That's, I guess, the discussion point, is that why First Edition Charizard or Chansey or Hitmonchan or whoever's tough to grade, it's the challenge of Minter. So if you have one that is actually mint, I have, for example, pre-release 9 Clefable, PSA 9. Really tough to grade. There's no 10s, and there's a handful of 9s. So that's one where it's like Minter is fully maxed out. So yeah, with modern stuff, it's like barely touching those. And the thing is that markets can remain irrational longer than we can all remain solvent. That's the lesson learned from all this. I had a conversation with someone earlier, I promise it's relevant, about the dress that Kim Kardashian wore. I'm sure Bob the Builder would like that I know some pop culture thing happening. She wore Marilyn Monroe's dress, I guess, that she bought from like Ripley's or something. And the person who was telling me, he's like, yeah, it's now worth less. And I was like, actually, the market is so big now that there might be someone who wants that. There might be someone who's like, oh, I actually like both those people, and I have crazy amounts of money, and I'm going to just buy that for a record price. So that's what we're dealing with. We have such a high level of exposure today. When I first uttered older, rare, mint, or better, it's a smaller market. Modern is not what it is now. Modern was not pumping out these beautiful arts one after another. It was a different landscape. But those fundamentals still remain. As far as value is concerned, they're still very true. It doesn't mean that's the only way to ascertain value. That's the thing to remember. I'm even saying this as the creator of that statement. I'm arguing against myself that multiple things can be true. That's really it. Like S&P 500 can do well, and you can also make money in Bitcoin. Complete opposites. Bitcoin is based on literally nothing. Or Dogecoin. Let's even go further. Because Bitcoin's a made man now. Just go further into the crypto. You can make crazy moves on that stuff. So those two things can exist. You can go to the casino and put it all in black and double your money. I'm not suggesting modern is that. I'm just trying to paint the picture that multiple things can be true. And right now, modern is definitely driven heavily by popularity and beautiful art and the experience, a little bit of gambling as well. A lot of factors just weren't there when I said older remember to better for the first time. Those things just literally didn't exist. You didn't have Whatnot. You didn't have streaming. Gambling was not legal. It wasn't on the helmets at hockey games. It wasn't on your app when you download it. We're in a different world now that has different influences and that influence people in a different way. So yeah, I think modern, I almost call it just popular because that's what it is. Modern is the popular kid right now. It is on stage, and some of these exit stage left. And I'll be curious to see what happens with those secret art rares in a few years from now. There might be an opportunity, and someone here might be buying some of that because some of them are gonna be so cheap that it's just like, why not? Like I did that with the amazing rares. I think I have 1,000 Kyogre amazing rares. Like I just have stuff that I bought. I'm like, I don't care what this does. They're $1 a piece. I didn't care. They were like $1 or less than $1. I'm like, fine, screw it. We'll see what happens. I'll do those and when PSA lowers their price to something at $10. But there you go. You worked out a crazy Patreon buy there that I bought. I don't even know how long ago that was. How old are Amazing Rares? Like 5 years? 5 years ago? There you go. All right, Timmy says, Scott, when E4 started, what percent of high-end buyers were on E4 versus today? I feel like over time, the market has a lot more buyers that may never have heard of E4. I was interested in your take on some of the high-end buyers that are in E4 over time and what this represents for the hobby in your eyes. Great question there, actually, to tie in a lot of things we've been talking about with growth. And I 100% agree that back in the day, you had more of the market overall on E4. And it's because a lot of these avenues didn't exist. Again, you didn't have streamers. When I started doing Pokemon as an adult, Instagram did not exist. Like, I don't mean it didn't exist in Pokemon. I mean it literally didn't exist. YouTube barely existed. Like, you had Chalkit Rain and that guy, Maya Heian all over. Like, that's what you had. That was it. Like, that's all you had. This stuff was either not there or bare bones. So, going through time, like, forums are still the thing to do. Like, Reddit was not what it is now. You didn't have whatever it is, the TCG, whatever it is on Reddit. I don't remember the name, Pokemon TCG. You didn't have any of that stuff. None of this existed. YouTube was not a thing. Once you started to develop, it was very low-key. It was an occasional opening, occasional hand video. Nobody was discussing content. This was not a thing. I was one of the first people in Pokemon to do that. Echoing Rudy, really, he was one of the first guys to do that. No one really showed their face on camera. No one really talked about anything. There's no cardboard analysis. So, yeah, that's why E4, probably had, by default, more the higher-end buyers. Now, today, there's so much exposure that there's no one place that can capture majority of it. But the thing I'll say still about E4 is that it will always remain like the Elite Four in the game as one of the final frontiers. You don't need to use it. It's not something that you necessarily need to do, but it is definitely a house for it's like a final frontier, if you will. And I've always tried to figure out ways to make it more palatable to people who are like level 1 still, because I started as level 1, and I was very intimidated to join PokeGym. I joined, and I didn't think I posted for a year because I was intimidated. So I always think about that. I'm like, how do I make it more palatable, for the Pallet Town trainers? But yeah, it's what I've just rambled about is the change in the market, and that's not only affects E4, but it affects everything. I don't care who you are. There's people I can name drop from back in the day that no one will know who they are. I remember like one of the first girl accounts on Instagram, she's probably just, bless her heart, like just devoured by the thirst traps that are out there now. And it's nothing to her fault. Like, she was just a girl who just posted cards she liked. Her face was in it sometimes, but now it's like OnlyFans, even that. None of this stuff existed. You have all these intersections that you couldn't have back then. It was a very simple world back then. So yeah, as always, I'm giving you way too long of an answer for what you asked, but that was it. That's my take on it, is that high-end buyers today also can be more, one other point here, idea is that they can be more ephemeral. Back in the day, you really went from Pallet Town to E4. That's what you did. You really went through this very similar process because modern was not booming. It was not a hyper gambling investment thing that it is today. So a lot of us were doing a very similar thing in a similar way, where now you could collect the same thing in so many different ways. And there could be high-end guys who come in, flash in the pan, come in hot. Remember Collectibles Guru? Remember that guy? Half of you probably know who I'm talking about because, again, flash in the pan. That super shiny guy, that chrome-looking dude in Logan Paul's opening. Dude came in, stuff's not hot anymore, he's out of here. You know, he's on to the next thing. You didn't have stuff like that. And he's definitely not going to come into E4 because it's too boring for him. You know, there's not enough like forearm tattoos and Rolexes or whatever he was into. Not trying to knock anyone who does that, but that guy was a character. If you don't know who that dude was, he was a character. I remember one of the streams he was in, they opened up a fake box and Max Mofo was in the comments like, get this shiny head scammer out of here, whatever. He was saying some wild stuff. But yeah, that was a moment that's now past, you know, flash in the pan. It's all over. So yeah, things are much more ephemeral today, and that extends to high-end buyers. You know, some of them come and go. People that were thrown down years ago are completely irrelevant now. Maybe one day that'll happen to me. You know, it can happen to anyone because the market is so vast. It's just so big. There's so many. And with that said, majority of people in the world still don't collect Pokemon cards. That's the beauty of Marcus. It's like two things can be true. That's my new slogan. Like, two things can be true. That seem counterintuitive. Like, it's such a vast market today in collectibles, and still most of the world probably doesn't collect Pokemon cards. You know, it's just wild. But yeah, there you go. I feel like I just do story time with every freaking question you guys ask me. All right, next we have Nick Hill, who we have a 2-for-1 here. So the first question is, hey Scott, congrats on Neo Trainer sales. You mentioned in the past you generally don't sell cards you have doubles of when there are trophies. With your business being where it is today and the steady source of consignments, lower end cards yet to process to have realized the value and a significant buffer from the past few years, your high sales, what went your decision to sell such rare cards at an auction instead of counting to hold? Would love to hear more about your thought process. Oh, you're going to get the full breakdown because I can't stop yapping every time someone asks me a question. So you're right there, Nikhil. You're in the zone about doubles. One thing I'll say is I have a mostly complete set of those. So I was like, okay, I can get rid of one. And especially because I have a double of the number 2. I actually have a number 2, and we're giving the full breakdown here in new back and old back of those. So I might try to put together an old back set of it. But yeah, I have actually doubles of the 2 specifically in both old back and new of those cards. But why I sold those is not only because I actually have basically another set, but I paid probably $3,000 for all 3 of them. So when I saw them go for like 200K, I'm like, dude, whatever. Like, it can go for. Honestly, when I was watching them, I watched them end live, and once they got over 100K, I'm like, I'm more than happy with this. And people were talking to Discord. They're like, yeah, it wasn't as like Suxon was as good as the last price. Like, they weren't throwing shade. They were just saying that. And I'm like, guys, I'm more than happy with this price. Like, I paid $3,000. Like, it's fine. The number 2 specifically is just on the podium here. The number 2, I paid $800. It's just like stupid. That's why people are like, oh, the market's going down. I'm like, okay. Like, it's a whole new world. It's a whole other place. So, yeah, that's why I paid for them. You know, these prices are not attainable anymore because you got to remember this is way, 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 way back. Like, I bought that number 2. It was a 1.5 cert. So go time travel to when 1.5 certs were happening. That was like, what, 2008? Literally before Instagram. That was what I was talking about with the Maya the little hedgehog or whatever, you know, early YouTube videos. That's what it was. Like, how do you find trophy cards back then? Let alone, how do you find and collect trophy or any Pokemon card back then? Then Japanese exclusive promos, and then trophy cards. Like, I was way, way, way into it early on. So anyway, that's why I sold them. Really good memory on the doubles there, because I usually don't like to sell stuff if I don't have doubles. I have sold, you know, that 97 set that I can talk about now finally. I don't have the number 2, but I have the 1 and 3, so I'm like, whatever. You're giving me an insane offer I can't refuse. I got to do that deal. Kind of felt like that too here. It's not that I necessarily need the money, but I do have a target price I want to hit with cash or whatever you want to say. And when I do, I'll definitely reassess what I'm going to do. But yeah, anyway, there you go. That's the very, very long-winded but juicy information there. And for your second question, you said I forgot my question like I usually do every month. But Pokemon has allowed such an expansive collector base from various walks of life. You have mentioned that people dive deeper into Pokemon collecting, and it takes them away from some of the more harmful addictions such as drugs and traditional gambling for sure. From what you've heard, how has that process actually occurred? I imagine breaking an addiction in both the physiological and habit sense are already difficult, but how does Pokemon effectively fill the gap that allows for sobriety or even the very least reduction? Bit of a somber question, but love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, that is a bit somber, but there's been plenty of people who are still here in Patreon who have been addicted to, whether it's something like more recreational like weed or harder drugs. Luckily, I've never had an affinity for drugs or alcohol. I know I have a very addictive personality. I remember Rudy saying that, and I'm like, yeah, that's me too, man. Like, I don't mess with that stuff because I am. Look at me, like, look at this, look at this shit. Like, it's like at a point where I'm like, what do I even need anymore? And I just like find some way to enjoy it or emotional satisfaction. So I completely empathize with it, and I think today especially, it's harder to not get addicted to things. You have all your devices and everything around you trying to addict you. Like just reading news or doing something normal now. It's like notification, and it gets more benign and benign and benign, and they're still notifying you. Like even tornado sirens is a very Midwest mention, but like tornado sirens now are mouthing off when there's like hail coming down. I'm like, no, if there's not a tornado, you need to shut up. Like, this is the world we're in. Overstimulation, over notification, we're overexposed. So yeah, it's very, very easy to get addicted to things. And Pokemon has been a saving grace for a lot of people. Without my philosophizing, I remember when I started doing this, one of my high school / college friend acquaintances, I remember she was telling me how she had an uncle who got out of alcoholism with Pokemon cards. And we're talking the 90s. Like, he did that in the 90s. And it made me feel so good because I'm like, yeah, that's like, I was like, I know guys our age, telling her about like people our age who did the same thing. And it's definitely in line. I can't speak to the physical part, but I feel like when you're in a routine, it helps break those bad routines and habits. So collecting is definitely, I've always said it's a healthy addiction or healthy hobby because it can get a lot worse. I know guys who have gambled away money that would like put you into cardiac arrest. Like people who gave like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, like close to $1 million, probably some who have that I haven't even confirmed, Like some of these guys who would consign stuff with me. I remember one in particular consigned a great trophy card once in a lifetime, gambled away 700 grand. I'm like, dude, you could have bought some of the worst stuff in Pokemon and you'd still be better off. And I didn't want to rub salt in the wound because they know, like they knew they had an issue, but 700, name the card. What card can't you get with that money right now in Pokemon? You can get any card. Just choose it. Literally just pick your poison. So yeah, it's something that, the thing I always try to remind people is when you really zoom out, we got it good in Pokemon. There's definitely things, I've had to combat a lot of the noise and negativity for sure. It's very annoying, but we still have it good. The issues we deal with. Think about the complaints that are made in Pokemon. The controversies are so lame. It's like, oh, the insert numbers aren't right, because the new 9s are the best. Or now we've gone full circle and it's 1s again. But it's like these are our like pointless things. We're like, yeah, people who are addicted to hard drugs, it's like, yeah, it could kill you. Like this stuff could literally just take you out. So yeah, that's not going to happen, at least with Pokemon. Also, a nice thing is Pikachu's not going to do steroids. Charizard's not going to catch a rape allegation or something. Typhlosion bite now, get in trouble. But, he caught something there with those gameplay leaks. But yeah, it's healthier in that sense. It's definitely more pure. It's more comforting. And yeah, that's all I can speak to really. Because again, I never really messed with the drugs and alcohol. It wasn't my thing. Collectibles are. They just satisfy that emotional appeal. And yeah, but it can be addicting. I know people who spent money, who need to take out money, who get deep into debt. I'm much more conservative thanks to my parents and upbringing. But other than that, I think the struggle of Pokemon is just keeping your head on. I think that's really it. You're not dealing with a physiological, as insofar as like this opioids chemically altering you. There's definitely some physiological thing happening when you're overstimulated or whatever. But it's more about like, hey, I don't need to listen to this noise. It's not adding value to me. For one thing I recently did, I moved my Instagram and YouTube app to the next, what do you call it? When you have to swipe over, next page. It's not on the front page anymore on my phone because I was tired of seeing it. I don't need to check it that often. I would just check it for no reason. I'm like, why am I checking this? I don't even post public videos. Like, what am I doing? So I moved it to the other side. Another breath of fresh air. So that's more what you got to deal with Pokemon. But yeah, I think overall it's a healthy hobby, and there's plenty of people who've gotten out of the darkness and into the southern island sunshine of Pokemon that's been from day one, like that girl I mentioned. It's something that it's a very feel-good story because I think it's a way to transition. It's like a nicotine, if you will. It can get you out of out of one of those dark corners. All right, next up we have Paul. It says hashtag gotta catch them all, hashtag team double dip. Greetings, Scott. Hope you're doing well and I got a fun one. Would you be able to grab a binder nearby and show us what's going on there? Curious how you organize and put binders together. Thanks. I'll do it, Paul. We'll do it. We'll do it for the video. I got some off camera here. I'll be right back. All right. We got, let's see what's behind binder number 1 here. All right, so this is a Magic binder. I promise the ones after our Pokemon. And this is Legends. So Magic is very straightforward. What I do is alphabetical order. Legends is one of the 4 Horsemen. This is a massive set, by the way. I think this whole binder is going to be Legends. But you got phenomenal cards. Like, you can look these up, like All Hallows Eve. Very iconic card. Appropriate for Halloween. Christopher Rush as well. I think, honestly, one of his best cards that he's done. You also have stuff in here that's very controversial. Like, where's the guy? There's one where it's like, just like, this has like these cloaked figures. Like, what are we doing? There's one where it's like there's a body hanging upside down, a person with a little like scythe or something. It's Magic's doing something that Pokemon does not. Definitely not as comfortable. Yeah, here it goes. Invoke Prejudice. We got a hood guy with an axe. If you read up on that artist, he like apparently likes Hitler. Not a great time, but there's a lot in here that I think is part of history that you couldn't reproduce today. There's a lot of cards that you would probably have to censor. In fact, I think, Matt, there goes the one I was talking about. Super creepy. It's like a knife in the foreground, bodies wrapped up, hanging upside down in the background. There's Magic the Gathering for you. But then you have stuff like Amy Weber, that's why I like her. She's like a comfort in the storm, of just like a skeleton floating around on an ocean. So yeah, this is my Legends binder. Very iconic set. Great art, by the way, even though there's like the darkness or whatever you want to say. Cool little stained glass art there as well. You probably can't even see any of this stuff, but yeah, you should look up the art on Legends. It's really fun. There's another one. Sea King's Blessings, really cool art. Yeah, you could just scroll. Oh, there it is. There's the Spiritual Sanctuary. You know that what I posted on Instagram, which is right behind the camera here. That original artwork I bought of this card. So that's a really special one. I remember when I saw this, kind of reminded me of Prince of Persia. You know when you like go behind the curtain and it's like this like blue lit area and you get full health. That's the sound I heard when I played it, but that's what that reminds me of. So that's what I think of. And that's Amy Weber. Love the art. You also have a naked lady here just sitting by a stream. So yeah, Magic is all over the place. It's what I love about it though is like that was part of the 90s. Like you could do stuff like that and it wasn't super intense. Like it wasn't like, yeah, even that person with the scythe, it's like you understand this is fiction, right? And then like I have Arabian Nights as well, and there's like cards in there like Jihad. That one didn't age well, but again, it's part of that what was going on back then. But yeah, for Pokemon stuff, what you're actually here for, here's my Neo binder that I just happen to have. This one is going to be in order. This is going to be very straightforward, where I do like hollows and then rares. So this is first edition Neo Gen. I actually spend a lot of time looking at the common uncommons of trainers these days. Neo Discovery is probably the least familiar Neo set that I have. I don't look at it as, oh, there goes the Magnemite that I was talking about. Love the, what is it, future retroism or retrofuturism, whichever way you say it. Love that style, looking like the Matrix. There's your original Moonbryon. Yeah, like that Poliwhirl's iconic from Neo Discovery. The Poliwag as well. Those really stick out to me more. Then, of course, we have Neo Rev in here. Some of these are the double hollow. I remember Miss Drevius was. I remember buying that actually from Shiz a while back. Actually, these, so when we get to Neo, so I got Neo Destiny in here as well. There's the Shinings for Neo Rev. When we get to Neo Destiny, I remember buying the set. I had the full set from a big purchase I made without the hollows, so I had to go get all the hollows individually. And the Shining cards, I think, are all the way in the back here. Yeah. So the Shining cards, I remember I always use this example for cracking. That's a PSA 7 that I cracked. And I think there was another one here I cracked. I can't remember which one. Definitely wasn't the Tyranitar because I could see a crease on it. So it wasn't that one. But I remember the Shining Charizard was a PSA 7. And I've never actually looked at the back of it, but that's a clean 7. That's a really clean 7. Yeah, that's a super clean. Honestly, Okay, there's a little bit of whitening. I'm like, how is this thing 7? So yeah, it's got a little bit of whitening there on the bottom, but yeah, that's a perfect binder card. No scratches on the front, a little bit of whitening on the back. Who's checking it? It's like in Shawshank Redemption. Who's looking at somebody's shoes? Like nobody cares about that. So yeah, this is how I do my binders, and I don't know what this last one is here. Okay, so this is the one I did so PFM was my Secret Santa. I promised there was no, no corruption. But he was my Secret Santa, and I did the artist, I'll probably butcher the name, Sarada is the T silent. But the one who hides all the Pokeballs in the art. This is the latest. This is probably one of the most recent binders I've done, just a fun binder, where I got all the cards that have the hidden Pokeballs in them. And we could see where I left off, because I need to update. Oh, there goes, what's his name? Greedent and the Blissey V. But this is such a fun binder to do. Some of these cards are like 25 cents. Like S. Pratt Catsing Days could have done this. You know, you have a few, like you have your Dunsparce or whatever, that maybe are 20 bucks or something. But yeah, I left off on Deoxys, so I got to get some of the new ones. But yeah, those are some of the binders I have. I'm doing that Japanese one. I don't know if/when I'll ever reveal some of it. Like, I actually have cards here. I'll do a little teaser. This guy's going in there. It's a Fan Club Carp. This one's going in there. This is a Grand Party that I cracked. I think it was a 7.5 or some decimal grade. I'm like, if you're a decimal grade, you're going in the binder. So I already have a Grand Party in my collection, but this is another binder version that we'll see what it looks like. But there you go. You got me to get up from the chair and everything. All right, last couple questions here. We have Bob the Builder, who says, come on, Bob. Who's your favorite OnlyFans model or porn star? Whenever you told me you were 23 or young or whatever, now I know for sure. Now this tells me for sure that you're 23 or whatever you said. Maybe if I was actually drinking an adult beverage here, I would let loose and tell. I don't know a single porn star. The one that went to Gary's with Logan that time, I had to look her up. Google safe search, not incognito. I safe searched it. But like, I'm completely out of touch, man. I feel like an old man now. If I threw out some of the names from high school, you'd be like, what? So yeah, I'm not going to embarrass myself like that. Maybe on my last Patreon video, if you ask me then, maybe I'll not really embarrass myself. But OnlyFans is one of those things. I hear some guys at hockey talk about it, also younger. And I'm just like, dude, this is a wild time to be alive. More power to you. I'm not judging anybody with this stuff. Like, whatever. Some of these women who make more money doing that than their teaching job, whatever. It's a free world. But yeah, I don't know a single name. Like, even that girl, I already forgot her name. She was on Gary's couch with Logan and that Mike guy, and I think she was dating that Mike dude. I can see her face. She's got like blue eyes or something. I don't know. This is how ridiculous it is. I don't even know. If you had to tell me, name the top 3 porn stars or whatever, I couldn't do it. Even that girl, I had to look up. Is it Lena something? I was going to say Lana Del Rey. And I'm like, no, that's the girl from Great Gatsby. Is that the girl from Great Gatsby? This is how out of touch I am. Who's the girl who sings from Great Gatsby? That song? And this is my reference to Great Gatsby. Isn't Lana Del Rey? A little bit of plastic surgery. Anyway, this is why. You ask me a pop culture question, you're going to get a Gary response, because I have no idea. Like, Gary probably knows more than I do. All right, last but not least here, ending with, I think, an actual Pokemon question. Scott, I am embarrassed about the Leafs' performance against the Blues last week. Speaking of sports gambling again, all I can say is thank goodness we didn't get a better Pikachu illustrator on the Blues-Leafs game. Yeah, the Blues showed up that game. And cool to hear a connection with the Leafs. My friend's cousin, Bobby Bertuzzo, was on the Blues when they won the Cup, and he got us tickets to go to the Leafs-Blues in Toronto that year. We got to meet the team after. I got a soft spot for your Blues as well. Oh, that's awesome, man. Yeah, Robert Bertuzzo was like, I think he was like third-line defense, but he was like the tough guy, bigger, taller guy. I think he actually was at one of the games recently. He plays for... Oh, who's he play for? He was out, I think, injured. Oh, my God. I just watched the game. I have no memory anymore. But, yeah, he was up there in the crowd for whatever team he's playing on now. And, yeah, he was definitely part of that. Dude, that 2019 team, never saw it coming. Now they're all in infamy, like anybody who was on that team. Anyway, I want to know your thoughts on people transitioning from collecting modern to vintage. What percentage of people do you think started collecting modern during the boom and you think will branch out into collecting vintage down the road? And how could you potentially impact vintage collecting market in, say, 5 to 10 years? Thanks for answering, Jimmer. Yeah, we've done a lot of discussion on like modern versus vintage. And I guess one other angle here we didn't touch on is that back in the day, Modern was the gateway drug. Not to make a dark joke about being addicted, but that's really what it was. Evolutions was like the gateway to get you in. In fact, another data point to this, when I was at a recent hockey friend's kid's birthday party, one of the guys there dabbles like in sports cards and stuff, and he said he bought 151 because he saw it come across his TikTok stream. And he's like, yeah, I remember all these Pokemon. So he went and got a box, pulled a Charizard too. And I always use that as a data point because that's, I think, how people get started. Now, what's happening today is there's so much, like with that guy, so much more streaming that's keeping you in that like ecosystem to just do a lot of what's going on there. Where back in the day when you did evolutions, that was more like a personal thing. So it's like, hey, I'm going to go get evolutions because I recognize like the Raticate from back in the day. And it's more personal. And then you branch out on your own. And that also, I think, has more of a direct connection to the past and vintage, where, you know, this new stuff, you can really stay just with it. So I don't really know how much is going to have an overlap. I think there's always going to be that progression. You're going to go with what you're familiar with. You know, guys getting back into it are probably older, and they probably started or saw Pokemon at an earlier time. By default, if you're in your 20s and even into your vintage 30s like myself, you had some prior experience, so you're going to check on that at least at some point. I don't know how that evolved, but all I can say is with things like Hidden Fate, Shining Legends was another one, Evolutions, Hidden Fates, Shining Legends. You could even say Shining Fates are a bit, but I think those prior ones were definitely big entry points. Big time entry points. Like Evolutions was a huge one. People talk about Pokemon Go, but a big part of it was really Evolutions. That brought in so many people specifically to trading cards. Now you did get carryover. I remember my Naked Misty started to do well in 2016, and probably because of Pokemon Go, and tying in this idea of prior experiences. That's what I did. I went and looked up all this stuff I saw when I was a kid. I was like, what's Lugia doing with those 3 energy attack? You know, what's this new Charizard EX? You know, I really started to start from what I knew and then see what was going on now, and then going back and forth between, you know, the past and present. So yeah, I think it definitely happens, but today there's more of an ecosystem, or there's more like of these cell channels, if you will, of ways to stay in that modern environment. Like you don't really have to leave if you don't want to. Where back then with Evolutions, yeah, you get your fill with Evolutions, but now what? You know, you did the master set of Evolutions, which is a big chase that a lot of people did. Now what do you do? You know, Modern wasn't as hot. It wasn't as constant of a hit mechanism. The stage wasn't as full of as many actors as it is now, not as many cards. It was just like your Charizard or whatever it was, you know, your chase card. It wasn't like it is now. You know, you have stuff constantly being pumped out all the time, nonstop, especially throwing in the curveball of like Chinese things happening too. There's just so much more today to buy that's being printed now that's still fresh from the printers, where back then you didn't have as much. You know, when I started doing this, the final point here, I promise, is very relevant. Joe Orlando said to anyone getting into sports in, like, let's say 09, he was like, you need to figure out what team you want to collect, what player you want to go for, what era you want to get into. He's like, because you can't collect it all. Because sports had over 100 years. And I'm like, whatever, Joe, what do you know? President of PSA, what do you know about collecting? I'm like, I'm catching it all. I'm true to it. I'm ride or die, got to catch them all, you know. And in 2009, you could do that in Pokemon. And in 2011, I almost did. I almost got every single card that was there in 2011. Almost every single one. And then all of a sudden, you had this thing happen where it's like Modern is expanding into more rarity types, especially beyond when you get to 2016 and further. 2017 is when it was just impossible. Once you start to get hyper rares, secret rares, full arts, regular full arts, half or flat Vs, whatever you want to call them, flat EXs at the time, you couldn't do it. It was exhausting. It was a full-time job and then some. And then once you compound all these new type of prize cards, all these new type of trophy cards, back then it was just, here's your Master Scroll that comes out slow and steady. Here's your Miracle Diamond that comes out slow and steady. Yeah, that was a new card back in the day. Yeah, I'll go even further. Here's your new Victory Orb with a Mew in it now. I love Photoshop Victory Orb. You know, I think it was Akabane who did that one. So yeah, that was very slow and steady. It was more attainable, where now it's not. You can't possibly collect them all. I hate to be the Buzz Killington, because I tried it when it was more attainable. Maybe if I had infinite funds back then, I really could have done it. But even then, if you have infinite money, there's just certain cards that don't appear. I was able to nab some of those, like a 2001 win. When that one appeared, I was like, oh, God. I remember There were so many people I could tell you stories forever about people who exited the hobby. Ancient people who I bought the illustrator from. I'm talking ancient names that nobody would know anymore. I don't even think the dad's alive anymore. That's how long it was. The one card they wanted. The one they wanted. They got all the other ones they wanted. The one they wanted was that 2001 Wind. I remember there's a girl who had an illustrator as well that I sold one of my first illustrator to. She exited as well, and the one card she wanted was that Wind because she couldn't get it. So anyway, my point is that even with this, like, the world we're in now is just so much, it's expanded so greatly compared to then. You couldn't just, back then it was much smaller. Your pool of cards is much smaller. Today the pool of cards is never ending. It feels like it's just infinite. Even when I'm pontificating about secret art rares and all that, I think they're beautiful, but I think there's so many. Even to the point where I can't even figure out what set they're part of. I'm like, here's this cool execute on a basketball court, but like, what part of this, what are you from? Like, I can't tell anymore. You know, it's a whole crazy world we're in now. It's just so much to take in. It's overwhelming, overstimulation. So anyway, the point of all of this rambling is that I think it's harder to make that easy transition that was very natural, and especially because it was more intimate with Evolutions, where now it is like, hey, let me check out what this streamer is doing tomorrow or next week, and it's just the next new modern thing that's happening. You know, people can stay there, but I still think the curiosity remains. If you're coming into this and you're 20 and 30 years old, whether you started with EX, I know some people now who started with Heart Gold, Soul Silver. That's where we are. You know, some people started with Diamond and Pearl. They're going to have that curiosity. They're going to look at it. And Por qué no los dos? The final thing I'm going to say over and over that you get tired of: multiple things can be true, multiple things can exist. The word also exists. You can do your vintage curiosity, and you can do whatever modern thing's happening. You know, I have an itch right now to try to do some of those secret art rares. Who knows if it'll materialize, but this is how it works as a collector. You know, a lot of collecting desires come through me, and I don't know which one actually ends up being a double-click purchase. That's another thing to consider within each person. There's so many thoughts of collector of what I could do, but anyway, this is way too beyond what you wanted. I think ultimately that you'll always have that avenue, that curiosity, you know, where you started. But back in the day, it was like the main road, where now there's so many different paths to a same destination. You know, if you want to collect cards, it can be just modern. It can be a bit of vintage, modern, whatever. You know, where back in the day, a lot of us were collecting in the same way or a similar way, where now it's varied. And I'm sure we'll continue this conversation, you know, whether it's in the next Q&A after this or a year from now, because it's just where we are, and I don't think it's going anywhere. So that's what I have. I hope I answered some of your questions and didn't just take it as an opportunity to let my brain just, I feel like it's like Inside Out, where it's just like, hey, here's this memory. I don't know if it's relevant, but I hope it is. As always, guys, thank you for your support. I appreciate it. This is so much fun, to a point where I probably need to be more focused. But yeah, feel free to let it ride, and let any other questions, any thoughts in your mind, type it out in the MMR, and I'll respond to it in the last Q&A for November. Then we'll start back up in December. If you want to consign, message me at any point. If it is too late, we can always wrap around to January. But that's everything I have. Thanks as always. You know the limit how I feel, and I'll be back in about 10 days or so. For the new members, I usually record on the 10th or 11th or 20th or 21st, just to let you know for the cutoff. That's pretty much it. Yeah, go enjoy life now. Till next time.